Hey guys, Nintendrew here. Listen, I am a huge fan of the Nintendo DS. In fact, it might be hard to believe, but my very first game system was a DS Lite that I bought back in 2007, and in some ways that was the start of my love for gaming. But even if you're a seasoned collector like me, there are still a few secrets and features sandwiched between these two displays that you might not know about. So today, we're shining a spotlight on Nintendo's legendary touchscreen handheld and taking a look at 10 surprising DS facts you might have missed. Let's get to it. Alright, just before we get started, I want to remind you guys, in case you're new to the channel or are returning after a while, I made a game. It's called Carl, and it's available right now on PC and consoles. This game is a love letter to all the games I grew up with, and if you enjoy platformers with a healthy dose of charm, like Cave Story or Super Paper Mario, I think it'll be right up your alley. Making my own video game was a dream come true, and if you've ever thought you might like to make games yourself, you should absolutely check out today's video sponsor, Southern New Hampshire University. SNHU has one of the largest accredited nonprofit online degree offerings in the country. Through their game development program, you'll learn how to create realistic, dynamic gameplay experiences with AI, game physics, 2D and 3D graphics, and interface design. You'll learn how to code in languages like C++, C#, and Java, as well as 3D modeling and texturing with the latest game art software. And as if that wasn't enough, you'll also learn to research, develop, and contribute to advances and trends within the field of game programming. SNHU's courses are taught by a dedicated faculty with real-world experience, and they're also radically affordable, with some of the lowest tuition rates in the nation. If that sounds good to you, go to snhu.edu/Nintendrew or follow the link in the description below to see what the current average annual salary for a programmer is, and to request free information about the program. When you do, you'll talk with a real person about how the program can benefit you personally. Your path to a career in game development could be one click away, so definitely check that out if you're interested, and thank you to SNHU for sponsoring this portion of today's video. And with that out of the way, let's get started with fact number 1. What does DS stand for anyway? Well, as it turns out, it depends on who you ask. Most people tend to assume DS stands for dual screen, as the inclusion of two independent displays was the system's main departure from conventional handhelds. But according to Nintendo, the answer isn't quite so clear. An archived entry on their support website reads, "To our developers, it stands for Developer System, since we believe it gives game creators brand new tools which will lead to more innovative games for the world's players." But confusingly, the page goes on to say it can also stand for Dual Screen. So what's the deal? Is there no one official answer? Well, it could be argued that Nintendo DS is just its own thing. Like, the DSi XL isn't likely to be referred to as the Dual Screen Internet Extra Large, or the 3DS to be referred to as the 3 Developer System. It's just the 3D DS 3DS. So maybe Nintendo DS is just its own thing. A fun nod to the system's ambiguous name can also be found in a number of titles for the platform. For example, games like Advance Wars Dual Strike, Resident Evil Deadly Silence, Ninja Gaiden Dragon Sword, Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow, and Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor all shorten to their title plus DS when abbreviated, and these are just a portion of the titles that use this naming scheme. Number 2. Magnets. How do they work? As you probably already know, the DS family of handhelds has a sleep mode function that is activated when the system is closed. Some titles, like New Super Mario Bros., even play a fun sound effect when you close the system. But what you might not have realized is that this mechanism is actually driven by a tiny magnet embedded within the upper panel. When the two halves come together, a sensor in the bottom half detects the magnet and tells the system to go to sleep. This means that you can intentionally activate sleep mode with any household magnet by bringing it close enough to the sensor. Number 3. The DS Lite has a hidden Switch-like mode. Wouldn't it be cool if you could play all your favorite DS games on your TV like you can with the Switch? Well, as it turns out, that dream might not be too far-fetched. As discovered by the Lost Nintendo History group on GitHub, the DS Lite's system on a chip has a leftover composite video output signal that was never utilized. By making use of their open-source PCB design, a flex cable, and some custom firmware, you can modify your own DS Lite to display its gameplay directly on the big screen. It's a bit of an undertaking and unfortunately does require you to remove the top display entirely, so it might not be quite as convenient as you could hope for, but it's a great option for those looking to capture high-quality footage directly from the system. Number 4. PictoChat's unusual feature. PictoChat was a built-in piece of software included with every DS system, which allowed as many as 16 people at a time to connect over a local wireless connection in order to swap messages and drawings. If you had a DS during its heyday, you are probably all too familiar with this application, and might even have some fond memories of sharing artistic masterpieces with your friends. But what you might not have realized is that PictoChat served another little-known purpose. See, unlike modern consoles, the original Nintendo DS did not have any way of updating its firmware, so there wasn't really a need to include the firmware version number anywhere in the settings because most people would never need to see it. But oddly enough, PictoChat actually does have a rather unconventional way of reporting this data, likely used by Nintendo repair technicians and engineers at the time when servicing broken systems. Here's how to check yours. First, power down the handheld and insert a game into slot 1. Start the DS back up and open PictoChat. Then, with PictoChat running, eject the game cartridge. Your system should either lock up and freeze or display a solid color on both screens. If the system freezes, you've got the earliest firmware available at launch. If both screens turn blue, it's a revision from November of 2004. If they're green, it's the third version from February 2005. If you see yellow, it's a fourth version from June of 2005. And finally, if you see magenta, you've got one of the final firmware revisions from December of 2005 or later. Now, technically, you can still use this trick on a DS Lite, but it's much less interesting because you're always going to see magenta. That's because the DS Lite wasn't released until about half a year later in 2006, after Nintendo stopped using this color system. Number 5. Mario Kart DS's secret character. Mario Kart DS was undoubtedly one of the most beloved DS titles. It had some of the best content in the entire series and featured 8 playable characters to start, with an additional 4 characters that you could unlock by completing certain challenges. But one more character lurks in the game's code that is technically inaccessible unless you don't own the game. That might sound absurd, but if you know what I'm talking about, this makes perfect sense. Another flagship feature of the DS was download play, which allowed certain titles, like Mario Kart DS, to be played on up to 8 systems at once with just a single copy of the game. In the case of Mario Kart DS, one of the limitations of download play is that players without their own copy can only race as one character, Shy Guy. Upon joining a download play match, you'll be randomly assigned one of 8 colors of Shy Guy, and oddly enough, this is the only method to play as him in the game. That is, unless you want to bust out the old action replay and try some cheat codes. Number 6. Remember DS Download Station? Speaking of DS Download Play, another use for that feature was DS Download Stations. In a nutshell, players could visit retail stores like GameStop, Target, Toys R Us, Walmart, etc., and download demos and trailers for new releases and upcoming games. Now, all this might sound familiar, but you might have assumed that these download stations were running on some kind of special server or distribution machine, but that's not the case. Instead, just like download play games, this service used a standard DS console hidden within a lockbox behind the counter, along with one of these special cartridges. See, download stations were around in the mid-2000s, and at that time, the internet was still fairly young. It wasn't guaranteed that any particular store would necessarily have a connection, so instead of downloading new demos from the internet, a Nintendo representative would have to physically come to the store and swap out these cartridges when new games were released. But that does mean that if you can get your hands on one of these cartridges, you can still use it today and host your own DS download station at home, which I'm sure you've always dreamed of doing. Just me? Okay, moving on. Number 7. The Pokémon game with its own built-in Bluetooth adapter. While the DS doesn't have Bluetooth capability itself, one title included it in the cartridge in order to work with a specific wireless peripheral. Learn with Pokémon Typing Adventure uses a Bluetooth keyboard and teaches players how to type through the riveting sport of capturing Pokémon by spelling out their names. This spin-off is probably best described as something like Pokémon Snap meets Typing of the Dead. And it's pretty fun if you're into that sort of thing. But what surprises me the most is that they chose to embed a Bluetooth receiver into the DS cartridge to work with this keyboard, instead of including a Slot 2 peripheral like the Guitar Hero Grip or the Easy Piano. And while the game is only designed to work with this one Bluetooth keyboard, the keyboard itself can be paired with any number of compatible Bluetooth devices, like your computer or cell phone. Number 8. Wacky Japan exclusive peripherals. So yeah, speaking of peripherals, Japan had some really interesting exclusives over there. Here are just a few. Mag Kid Slide Adventure uses a slide controller to allow players to move in-game by physically dragging the DS around on a flat surface, much like a standard computer mouse. DS Terebi, or DS Television, uses a digital TV tuner in conjunction with the handheld to let players watch live over-the-air programming on the go. Unfortunately, it only works in a handful of countries that use the 1-seg television standard, so it's not very useful here in the States. But it does have a built-in copy of the Game & Watch game Lion, so that's something at least. And finally, DS Vision is a unique cartridge with a micro SD card slot, which could be used to view novels, manga, and TV shows purchased from the partner website of the same name. Of course, at this point, that service is long defunct, so today it's only really useful if you want to look at a few sample images of puppies and kittens. Number 9. A hidden, but useless, Wi-Fi feature. Here's another fact that's practically useless to know, but might impress your friends if they're as nerdy as I am. When setting up your DS for Wi-Fi within a supported title, you have a few options for identifying your router. You can scan for an access point, use AOSS, or opt for manual setup. But on a Japanese DS, there's another option, Simple Start. Similar to the AOSS feature in other regions, the Simple Start option allows you to connect to a compatible Simple Start router. But since those routers are exclusive to Japan, the option was removed from the menu in those other regions. However, the feature is still technically accessible on all DS systems. While on this screen, if you manage to hit the very top left pixel on the touchscreen, it will start scanning for a Simple Start router. This is nearly impossible to do with a regular stylus, but with a toothpick or a thumbtack you can manage to do it pretty consistently. Again, unless you're in Japan, this method is completely useless, but still interesting nonetheless. And finally, number 10, Happy Birthday! As you likely already know, when you set up your DS for the first time, you'll be prompted to give a few details about yourself, including your name, favorite color, and birthday. Those details can then be accessed by supported software titles to customize your gameplay experience. For instance, in Animal Crossing Wild World, the house that you move into will have a roof that matches your favorite color. And if you happen to play on your birthday, you'll be given a cake and villagers will acknowledge the celebration. But that's not all this data is used for. As a fun little addition, if you boot up the system on your special day, the classic Nintendo DS startup sound will be replaced with this alternate jingle. And if you enter PictoChat, the system will proudly announce the date to your friends. Alright, I think that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for watching this video on 10 weird Nintendo DS facts. I hope you enjoyed. As always, if you did like the video, please do consider subscribing to Nintendrew for all sorts of cool gaming content, and make sure to share it with any friends who might find it interesting. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye!